So I would love to welcome all of you to the Stockbridge Library, Museum, and Archives online poetry series. This series came up in a discussion between John Gillespie, the president of our board, and I. And John is a fervent poetry fan, and he thought it would be nice to have a virtual poetry series last April for Poetry Month. We are now in our second week.
Second week, I think.
Second week of our second year of this program, and we have had poets from across the nation. So we're very excited, and also excited to have Perry Nicholas with us today, a recently retired professor of English. He's joining us from Buffalo, New York today. Perry has been nominated 4 times for the Pushcart Prize, and his poems have appeared in Common Ground Review, Literary House Review, World Worth, Slant, Louisiana Literature, Chautauqua Literary Journal, The Healing Muse, and others. His poems have appeared on over 20 occasions in the Buffalo News, and he has approximately 150 poems in print and online available. Perry, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will turn the program over to you, John, and to you, Perry.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks for
Yeah,
having
Wendy, thanks you a lot. So Perry, do you think you can speed read the 150 poems? We have about 58 minutes. No, only kidding. That's
Okay.
a little humor to start today.
Okay. All right. Let me look them up.
Yeah, look them up. Yeah. No, thank you for reading today.
Thank you.
We start every session to understand part of the poet's creative process. So the first question is, there've been so many dramatic issues in the news in 2020, 2021, the pandemic, racial injustice, income inequality, obviously what happened January 6th, the whole political dimension, George Floyd. Have any of those issues found their way into your work?
I would say yes. I'm not really a political poet per se, but there's no way to get around that or ignore that. I mean, I think I've written probably more about racial issues than ever before. I political probably not. But there's no way. The pandemic for me, if that's what you're asking too, it was a very, very difficult time of writing. I did put out a book in January of 2021, and that was hard to finish. The pandemic has been very heavy for me creatively, but I've sort of, like many of you, I'm sure, but I sort of got through it. So I guess the answer is yes. I think they have made their way into my poems.
Great. So how does the creative process start for you? Like what triggers the beginning of a poem? Is it reading something? Is it a conversation? How do things start for you?
I could ask that of every writer that's sitting here. But for me, I always have my little notebook in my pocket where I jot down a phrase or a title or an idea or something that I want to go back to. That's how it starts. Inspired by, what is my work? Inspired by everything. I always told my creative writing students, there's poetry everywhere, everywhere. In a tree, in a conversation, in the look that you're giving me right now, in something that you say to me. There's poetry everywhere. And so for me, it's inspired by that and then grows later into something bigger. So it might be music. When I am stuck, for example, I will listen to music. I was just listening to Bruce before I came on here, just to get going. Opera, painting. I took up some painting in the pandemic. So really anything that will shake something loose. Probably the biggest thing, however, for me is reading. And I always tell my students, reading and writing go hand in hand. You want to be a better writer, read. Yep. And so I read to shake some ideas loose. So that's probably it. And old movies, I have to say, I can't live without TCM.
Yeah. So, so, we've heard a lot of people that keep, write down phrases in books. Is each phrase, kind of an individual item, or do you then go in, maybe combine some phrases, maybe do a
A
little bit of both?
a little bit of both, probably. I really don't know where the phrase is going to go. Sometimes I, like many of you, I compose in my head. And I'm always thinking in poetic lines. And so when somebody's speaking to me, unfortunately, I'm breaking it into lines and I'm thinking that way. And I've got it sort of mapped out in my head. Other times, the poet Leon Lee said it like this. He said, writing poetry is like riding a horse. And sometimes you're in control of the horse, and sometimes the horse just takes off and takes you somewhere that you never expected. That's the most wonderful feeling for me. That's the most exhilarating feeling, when the poem goes somewhere that you did not have mapped out, if that makes sense.
Right,
So,
right.
so I don't know. Both, really. A phrase might set it off, or might be part of it, or it might not work at all. And then I
Yeah.
would put it away and maybe use it later.
Okay. And this next question, we know doesn't have a complete answer, but we know that poems never end. They may just sit there in suspended animation, waiting for another horse ride or something like that. So, but when you put your book together, how do you know when one of your poems is,
Oh,
I guess, is kind of book ready? It's not finished, but it's book ready.
that's a great question. I revise and revise and revise, and I know there are poets that say they don't, and good for them. And they must be some kind of genius, because I can't do that. So I revise always, and until I feel like it is the best possible word choice, the best possible line breaks that I can come up with. And that takes a long time. That might take months going back and forth. When I try to convince myself that when I get into this, when I get into this form, it's done. Leave it alone. You can't do anything about it. And that's pretty much true, except sometimes when I read, like today, I'll read a poem and I say, what the hell was I thinking? What was I thinking? That doesn't sound right. And I'll change it on the spot. But for the most part, they're done when they go in my book. And it takes a long time to get to the point where I say it's done and should go in a book.
Great. Good. So please read some of your poetry and share some great insights
Great,
you have.
great. And thank you all for listening. And thank you, John and Wendy, for having me. And I was just a boy. The first dead person I ever saw wore a handkerchief over his face because he could not afford a coffin, as he was carried across cobblestones by 4 Greek men when I was just a boy. And I was just a boy when I experienced my first big lie, the one about tolerance towards others who were darker and different than us, watching my mother chase away an Indian kid with a hose. The very last time I saw my father almost set himself on fire in drunkenness, revving the engine, tires stuck in the mud. I didn't run as I should have, but steeled myself like a man, though I was just a boy. I answered the question, have you prayed? Every Sunday as an altar boy, after I found weekly faith is not always dreamlike, or if it is, often too thick to see through, especially by boys. When I realized I would feel young, even though I was decades to the wind, and prayer wouldn't make a tiny bit of difference, I learned to tuck in my wings, land and roll, always a boy in a man's shell, saved. What I thought
All
I
right.
would do today What I thought I would do today is just kind of read from some poems inspired by Boyhood, all the way to a trip that I did to Greece in 2012. It was the first time I had been back in 30 years, to the present book that I just mentioned that I put out a while ago. As I said, I hope you caught, I'm from a Greek American background, and so we were bilingual at home. So many of them have phrases and things that remind me of that life. This one is really about remembering people and remembering my mother's voice and the sounds that I remember. It's funny, the things that we remember about our parents. Could be a sound, it could be a smell. So many of these are based on the senses. And I think it's a good one for where do poems come from? As you said, where do they originate? Where do they start? This one was when I was watching a story on TV about water on Mars and on Mother's Day. So I just put the two together. Water on Mars on Mother's Day. And the poem is called Water on Mars. I remember when we used to talk mornings before I lifted off to school. Imprints of your words on my mind, now dried up like water on Mars. Your voice, a confident, foreign, robotic barking like the men in a ground control station as they direct the astronauts. Mine, a staticky code, searching to find a common frequency with you. I didn't know what language to use. You always sounded so right. And when men landed on the moon, I wished it was me, bouncing, light and free, an unfathomable distance between us and our home. These days, only your faint tracks. I barely hear the sound of water flowing, or you questioning why I'd want to travel anywhere that far in the first place. So remembering sounds of someone. This next one from that same book is a poem I wrote years ago for my daughter, who is here. And there's my little grandson too. I could see him. Okay, well, he's happy. And this one, she sent me on her honeymoon years ago. She sent me a photograph of her standing in front of the statue of David. And so that sort of got me thinking about fatherhood. In the shadow of David, I study your photograph in front of David's statue. Wonder how much of a shadow I cast on you. On you, before you placed yourself behind bulletproof glass to deal with your disappointment in me. Your figure like paper covering rock. You seem amazed how marble might be smoother than real people. You smile your nervous grin when he doesn't at all. Men create dark shades, you see. I recognize your seminary pose. Still, I marvel at your adult face, just as I interpret David's glance, his presence much slighter than mine. We will keep moving. These next two are father-inspired poems. Isn't it weird how on Zoom you have to think about things like glare in your glasses? We didn't have to think about that when we were live, did we? But anyway, two father-inspired poems. I should explain, my father was a painting contractor, and he was not an educated man. He never finished high school, but he was very, very street smart. And he taught me certain lessons that stayed with me. And one of them was folding drop cloths. And that grew into obviously a bigger lesson. And that's what this poem is about. Process analysis. My father, so long in heaven, showed me how to sing out loud, laugh without regret, and how to fold drop cloths at the end of a job. First, take one end in your hands, stretching the canvas material taut between you. Second, make an initial fold down the middle, touching the two corners together. Resist the temptation to walk towards your Father, he who gave you breath, as he repeats his usual, Miafura akoma pedimu. One more time, my child. Fold again and let it drop to the ground. Close the gap between you for now by rolling it up. Finally, forget all the times this didn't go smoothly, the nights he came slurring home. Hold tight to the rituals of your life. One day, small corner's all you'll have. Remember his voice in case he disappears from your dreams. Miafura akoma pedimu.
Nice.
Thanks. Again, it's funny what we remember about our parents. Those of us who have lost them, it might be a sound or a smell. And this one really is about smells that I remember around our home and around my father, and it triggers a lot of memories. Aura. Everything smelled of paint thinner to some degree around my father and our house. A foreign perfume or a man's spicy cologne. It circulated down the driveway from the beds of tired work trucks to the can-full garage, through the yard, never empty enough to play in. There was a lone lilac bush just on the other side of our fence, begging me to breathe in her fragrance every morning, but instead, I rose before the others to inhale my father as he loaded paint on the pickup with one hand, pulled lovingly on his non-filters with the other. Cigarettes, paint fumes, and stale whiskey, an intoxicating concoction of scents. They followed him day and night, and I respected his aura of thinner. It hung everywhere in the air, just as a father's force lingers heavy in a man's life. Strange how our jobs seep out of us unnoticed, undetected except to those who need us. I wonder if I smell of lead pencils, new paper, coffee, and chalk. Excuse me one moment. As I said, I went back to Greece after 30 years of not being there and spending a lot of time there as a boy. And it was quite an eye-opening experience. 1 week I spent in Athens teaching at the college there, teaching creative writing. And the second week I spent on a very tiny island my mother was born, and actually lived in the house that she grew up in, much refurbished now. But so it was a wonderful trip. And so these two poems are from that book called Beginnings, and it is a return to Greece. This one is, well, I'm going to read this one for my friend Gunilla because I know she likes it. It is staying in a hotel in the small island waiting to go to the house. Hotel Philoxenia. The hotel keeper, Marika, does everything she can to make this place what its name suggests. Friend to strangers. I'm an odd Odysseus, dragging a suitcase up 100 stairs, huffing. Embarrassed, I'm still searching at my age. I just as soon hole up in my cabin than fight my way along cobblestone paths with half the heart I had when I played soccer here as a boy. I hesitate to hold on to Marika's arm, since men don't touch married women in Greece. But she senses I'm struggling, takes my elbow anyway, and stares straight ahead. We don't need to say anything. For this final leg, she's a silent figurehead guiding her sailor home. We got some Odysseus in there too. When I stayed on the island in my mother's small house, there was a family next door. Just to lighten things up a little bit, it's a family next door. And when you sit outside on the island, you can hear absolutely every sound because it's so silent. And so these people were talking at night while I was sitting on my little terrace and speaking in Greek. And I realized that they were talking about me. So it's kind of a voyeur poem, listening to them, thinking, not knowing that I understood what they said. The loud Greek family next door. Andovre, fera mia bira. The loud Greek family continues on into the night, drowning out wildcats and dogs, motor scooters in the wind-cut distance. They get bored with the upcoming election, start on a new topic, me. Quiet Americano staying in the house next door. They laugh. Maybe the mosquitoes will devour him. His mother lived in the house, left for the States, and died. This draws some interest. His father's family from here too. Now some respect. Looks just like his first cousin with more hair. They sidestep to their eldest son, who spent some time in New York, London, ending up back here on the island working for a bank. But he can never afford a trip like this one. Back to me. Why is he here alone? Not realizing the American behind the shutters understands Greek. Mocking again. Fenete san pusti. He looks like he must be gay. Onward. I was kind of fun. You asked about whether the incidents of today make their way into my poetry, and this one certainly does. It's a book I finished at the end of 2019. Let me just explain that it is really a tribute to the hyphenated American, the Greek American, the Jewish American. I don't want to miss anybody here. The Irish American, the, what else do we have out there? Persian American, Swedish American. I'm trying to get everybody, but I don't know. But the hyphenated American, because we were really Americans when we grew up. We were kind of hyphenated. We were half Americans. Now I don't know what the hell we are, unless you drive around with a truck with a big flag. But anyway, I digress. So let's go here. I had the misfortune of reading poetry at a benefit in a Americana bar, in a kind of a sports bar. Well, my mistake, but I did it for a friend. Those people did not care about poetry. They sat with their little MAGA hats on and stared at me. And this is what this poem is kind of about, but it's really a tribute to all of us, because that's what made America. A Greek American reads poetry at an Americana bar. You don't have to understand language, just the concept or theme. It's the same for everyone. Life, an uplifted glass, an overturned beer bottle. A great deal depends on what type of hat you wear. If it's USA you advertise, then you may not want me sharing my heart. If it's the logo of a torn down plant, you may believe I stole your job. I know why you love her anthem. but don't you hear my struggle singing? Is my hair too slick, style not white enough? Langston Hughes once said, I too sing America. It's a different world.
Hey, Perry, there was
Yes.
a question in the chat box that,
Okay, because I'm not watching it because I'll get distracted.
no, it's all right. No, you don't have to. I'm going to read it. It says, I wonder what island in Greece his parents were from.
It's a very tiny, tiny island called Ignoussa, and it is the bigger island near it is Chios. So it's very close to Turkey. Way down southeast, you could actually see Turkey on a clear day, but it's a little tiny island. Permanent inhabitants, 900 people. That's how small. So it's right near Chios. And Samos is there on Lesbos, right in that area. Many of my poems, I'm going to go to my new book. It's called A Man in the Moon. Many of them are based on photographs, old movies, and music and poets that I admire. And so I thought I would read some of those and some that I had not read before. This one is based on an old photograph that I found of my mother, which was interesting. She was all dressed up in pearls and a satin outfit, which was way out of character for this woman. But I found a very young picture of her all dolled up like a movie star. And so I wrote this poem, Glamour Girl. You must have been reading an American movie magazine to come up with that satin outfit, sash, royal turban, and pearls. And you try to seduce the camera, a Hedy Lamarr pose perhaps, though you never ventured off your tiny island where people were so deprived they couldn't afford to buy even the cheapest house dress. This was no Hollywood, and I doubt you ever saw a picture show. Where's the abuse and isolation now? Behind you in this foolish photo? Mother, you sure were a poor movie queen. This next one is about our never-ending search for grace in this world, which seems to be more and more difficult these days. It's called No Grace. The idea of grace you read about in the final poem of the evening will never be yours, never anything close to attainable, since you still carry with you abandonment, sorrow, and silence. Grace, you remember, works only when we become larger than conflict, smaller than revenge against a poor artist. And grace as a name, a mild misnomer, is someone we wish would stop to talk, something we want to offer but can't easily. In the short space between stars and morning dew, only good grace might grant you a means of escape. I guess we'll go to the love poems. My students, all they really want to hear is the love poems whenever they hear me read. So we'll do a love poem inspired by a line in Neruda. I love you in this way. I do. I love you in a way I don't find words often enough. I don't love you the way books say, forever repeating, before sonnets dared not rhyme, when fate was poetic and intimate. Still, I don't love you anywhere but here at home, held by night inside a line's refusal to merge, dissipating dreams before dawn, leaving only anxious air, Stars and wishes no longer wishable, fleeting and gone before the bluish moon surrenders. I don't love in daylight, on a bench, in a breeze, smokeless and alone, as cold marble foreshadows what little time we may have. In left-handed ways, I love you. Don't know what it feels like to be right. I only ask you to stop. Understand just what it means for us to love this way. I live about a block away, although I was not here then, from the site of the 3407 crash. It's actually right behind me here. And this is strange, but every morning, almost every morning, and I told Ganola this, almost every morning when I go by the site or walking my dog, there are 2 baby deer there, right standing at the wreath. And my dog watches and I watch and I'm thinking, what is that all about? So I wrote a poem to the deer. The 2 of you. Only one of you approaches the flowery, snow-decorated wreath, while the other holds back, as if to stand guard, restrain a crowd, allow time for private prayer, not wishing to interfere with silent respect. Do you find the connection you seek? A spirit stretch out its disintegrated hand? It's taken over a decade to reconstruct this short timeline to eternity. Bury the black box of loss. Cover the stains with your holy hooves. This one is influenced by, it was in the Chronogram recently, and the Buffalo News, and it was influenced by one of my favorite movies of all time, and that's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And the epigraph for the poem is, and I guess you could say it is a pandemic poem, but it's really, I think, more about people, I think, misinterpreted it when it was in the news, but I think it's really about forgiveness. And how sometimes we can forgive someone, but we never forget. And it's a contemporary sonnet. And the epigraph is, why was I not made of stone like thee? From Quasimodo. And the title is Like Quasimodo. To turn a deaf ear, not enough to rid one of this past year's pain. The silent king of fools, you might say. Forgive those who abandoned, sent you to prison in the bell tower? Or is forgetting as high as one can climb? They cannot pray here. They are heathens to whom talking is like dancing. Somewhere inside they must know love, but love sounds are buried by tinny bells. And now they try to seek forgiveness? There's not enough room in my stone heart. Even if allowed to escape this ruin, I'm as shapeless as a man in the moon. And I think I will end from this book. Good. Timing's pretty good. I'm a good timer, I think. Yeah, with this is a pandemic poem, and it's based on the Eliot poem line about coffee spoons, measuring life in coffee spoons. And I guess it's about how to survive the pandemic, which was very, I admit, very difficult for me. Coffee spoons. It would be much easier if I could measure time in coffee or cigarettes. I go outside every hour, light up, contemplate the minutes, sift through the grounds to figure how much sunlight is left to endure before night crawls in and darkness moves so slow. Coffee won't help. Smokes will surely kill me. Right here on virtual Earth, life is changed, lacking in social graces, and it's recommended we all learn protection. Cover our skin from lips to toes. Caffeine, tobacco, or kiss, I'll cut a merciful hole in my mask. So those are from the new book, As a Man in the Moon. I'm just probably a couple more, and that will be it. A brand new poem, not in any book. Well, it will be soon because we talked about that. Okay, I think it's close. It's close. And again, some of my friends, Mary Louise and Granilla, did help me with these poems. So I don't write in a vacuum for sure. I have some good people around me, and it's a sonnet. And I wanted to try it. When I get stuck writing, I go to form and I go to rhyme and meter, and it kind of breaks it and gets me thinking about, writing. But that's this one is is a New Year sonnet, I think, and it is also inspired by, oh God, the Rabbit Moon recently, and James Bond is in there too. So how do you get them all in one poem? I'll show you. The Epiphany, the Bond, and the Moon. Time to settle all our remaining rifts. Forgive and forget should be the true goal. 12 days traveling, they brought the gifts, though this year nothing but a lump of coal. I dove for the cross when I was a boy, swam to the bottom and searched for old gold. The sea and the stars became my real toys until I learned we can't help but grow old. Pen and dictionary took up their space. Gilded ladies galore painted their bond on my heart, my wallet, my courting case. This all left me with a need to respond. Rather than failing to forget and forgive, accept this moon as the right place to live. I didn't plan to do this, but since we're in rhyming poems, I think I will end with an old rhyming poem that I was looking at earlier. And it is in rhyming couplets. And it's about an island in Greece. It's a story, and then it has the Beatles in it. So that's kind of cool. So I wanted to get some music in there too. It's called Return to Rodos. I'm afraid the ferry will no longer run between the two islands once I've begun to find my way back. It may sound silly, swimming in overdramatic rounds, this latent life fighting the undertow to reach you pinned on the beach below, doing something a little rougher than ballet. But I still tear up at that Beatles cliche about fear of wandering alone in the world. How long has it been since you were that girl, running barefoot to see if ships surround the Turkish turret protecting our town? It's too foggy, and I can't see past the shore. Bring a lantern. Lead me to your door. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening.
Fantastic. Now, for future poets, we're going to add a little singing part to the interpretation, a little dramatic interpretation. So
I have a lot of poems that have music in them, but I was kind of embarrassed of my voice, so I didn't do them today.
You have a great voice. You shouldn't be embarrassed.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's go back to the beginning. Let me find some.
Well, I'd like to officially open for questions and comments in the chat box. Susanna Case is thanking you for a good reading. Sandy says, wonderful, Perry. Need to log off, but chat soon.
They are both wonderful writers, too. I'll tell you. I've read Sandy's work. She's a novelist in Buffalo. And Susanna, I attended her reading, and she's a great poet. Really, really, really good.
As are you, I'd like to add.
Oh, thanks, thanks. It's fun. I enjoy it. I need it.
Yeah, I think the question, I'm always intrigued. So last week, I think we heard from our reader, there must have been 6 different forms this woman used to kind of express her poetry, and it was great. I felt like I was in some form class that, okay, we're going to do form number 1, then form number 2. I guess the question is, are forms something you use kind of as a lark, or is it an experiment? I'm just trying to understand. Some people are religious to forms, other people's it just happens once in a while.
That's a great question. For some people, it comes very easily. Form is very difficult for me, and that's why I don't do it much. Although I do have some. I have a book of sonnets I'm putting together now. Um, it seems to me like I said, when I'm sort of stuck, and I'm more comfortable in free verse, but when I'm stuck, I will try a form just to kind of jar something loose, a sonnet, a rhyming poem, something, a villanelle, something to get me thinking. I don't think I'm very good at it, and that's probably why I avoid it. I think form and content are really, really difficult to pull off. First of all, if you do it well, there's nothing better. When you get form and content to work together, there's nothing better, and it's a wonderful thing. But if you don't, for me, it just sounds too corny, and so that's why I don't do it. I find it difficult. So it's a stretch for me. It's almost like as an exercise for me. But some people can do it really, really well. Well, I grew up, my favorite poem for the poet when I was a kid was Frost, because he's so perfect. Every syllable and every rhyme is just so good. And so I grew up with Frost, but I can't do that. I mean, I can't pull that off. So, it's more of an exercise for me. Some people can do it. I find it difficult.
On the topic of form, question in the chat box from Karen: what is the most exotic form you have attempted?
Oh, geez. I probably tried everything over the years, pantoums and villanelles and sonnets. I try to do I wouldn't call it exotic, but I try to do things, abecedarians and anaphoras and things like that. But again, I don't do it very often. Much more comfortable free verse, I think, because it sounds more conversational to me.
Some more compliments in the chat box from Marge. Wonderful reading, Perry, as always.
She's very good too. I'm going to give it right back to everyone. Let's see. Oh, I think I could see them now. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm chatting.
And Marge, were you reading along in Perry's book when he was? It looked like you had the same book open. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
he does have it as a man on the
yeah.
moon.
It's nice. That's nice to do. Yeah, very nice.
It's nice to have the text in front of you and
Yeah,
hear the poet read it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, if there are no more questions, Ganila has a question.
Can I ask it because I have a hard time typing? So there's something artificial about form, and then there's something so authentic about your voice and your writing. So I wanted to know when those two clash, which one wins and why? And do you think you could write an artificial poem like that the content was not you or your voice, sort of imitating the form, like they did in the 18th century, Rochester and those guys? They
Sure,
kind of
sure.
wrote poems that everybody knew were quote unquote fake or unreal, but we have a conflict with this. Like I go to poetry because I want to hear something authentic and personal. But then if it is all artifice and some kind of made up thing, now what are your thoughts about this?
Oh, geez, that I think maybe I said it before. I mean, I think it's more authentic if I just kind of speak in my own voice. Are you saying, can you imitate? Yeah, I could. I could write you a perfect sonnet right now, and you know that. But will it sound authentic? I don't know. Maybe if we're lucky, maybe. Um, but so I don't know. You have to go with. I mean, if I read the poem at the end and the tone doesn't sound right or it doesn't sound like me, I would just scrap it. So I don't know if that answers anything. But again, I guess go back to form. Form is difficult. If you can do it well, then great, then great. I envy you and I think that's wonderful, but I struggle with it. Maybe it's too self-conscious or something. I'm not sure what it is, but what else? Anything? You can ask me anything. I could
Well,
tell
there's
you
a few more
tell
comments.
you a quick story if you have one. Well, how about we were talking earlier, Mary Louise and I were talking about weird things that people say to you at poetry readings. I had a woman I read at a college a couple of years ago, a local college, and I was the only reader there. And she seemed fascinated with the idea that, what does a poet do when he's not poeting? So she is asking me all this stuff, like, what do you do? I said, well, let me see. This morning I cleaned my rug with my new Hoover pet cleaner, and as if poets sit up in this ivory tower and just think all these poetic thoughts all day, and they don't walk their dog or clean up dog shit or things like that. So she's asking me all these personal things. Like I'm thinking, what is she getting at? So finally she says, what do poets smell like? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I said, well, it's for a joke. I said, well, why don't you come and smell me? She actually came from the back of the room up to the audience and she smelled my jacket. I don't know what the point is there. I guess is that, sometimes we think a person is the persona or something. Like a musician just sits there and sings all day in the house and in the shower and all day, and a poet just poeticizes all day long.
And librarians just sit around and read.
That's right. You little bookworms, that's all you do is just sit there and read all the time. And so it was weird, but I had never been smelled before at a reading. Luckily, I had taken a shower.
No, we're going to have the 6 senses of poetry reading. The singing, the voice, the smelling.
Okay.
Wendy, a whole new series could emerge from this reading today.
Sure.
So there are a couple other comments. One from your student, Morale.
Morale is a wonderful reader too.
Thank you, Professor Nicholas. Wonderful reading as always. And your daughter said, great job, Dad, in Papu.
Papu, yes. I'm recently a Papu, a granddad.
Yeah.
And I actually got to see him last week. I made the trip to Tampa and saw him. So that was a trip. That was great.
And then Mary Louise said, a fine reading from a fine poet. There's nothing about smell or anything, but we'll have to.
You don't want to smell my jacket, Mary Louise? She's a wonderful poet too. Hudson Valley. She's going to be featured in our series, our Buffalo Corner series in May, that Gunilla and I co-host. So there's a lot of good people here.
Well, I'm grateful to all of you for joining us. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to be in a Zoom room filled with poets and poetry fans. I will again post this recording to our YouTube channel, which is